Hey guys, and welcome back to the Warwick F1 Show podcast. This is the 34th episode of the 2025 season, and the Formula One calendar and the Formula One kind of circus is currently in its summer shutdown, meaning we don't have any races for a good while. This is the greatest opportunity then for us to look back at what the season has brought us so far. And in this one, we are going to be looking at reviewing and giving a grade to each Formula One driver this season. We've had 21 drivers because courtesy of Alpine, having 3 drivers this season, and we're going to be putting them on a tier maker. So we're seeing who has performed best this season based on the car and what they've been able to come out in terms of performance, and who's performed worst. I'm your host for this one, Anwar, and I am joined by my 2 co-hosts, Daniel and Lucy. So thank you guys for coming on. I think the first thing to just talk through is how we're doing this. We've got a set of tiers, obviously, we're doing a tier maker, where we've got S as the top grade, A, B, C, D, and then F being the worst of the worst. Having a horror show that if they've done that, we're going to put that in F. I think another important caveat is that we're going to be looking at purely their performance this season. Now, Lewis Hamilton is one of the greatest of all time, arguably the GOAT. So we're not going to put him in S tier because we're looking at what he's done in the 2025 season so far. Okay, that's kind of our criteria. Daniel and Lucy, is there anything you guys want to add before we get straight into the action here?
Yeah, I think it's like we're also making individual tier lists. Like, obviously, we'll discuss and we'll probably have similar things, but kind of averages will be taken for the overall tier list. But like, we will have our own opinions. We haven't just consulted about this beforehand and agreed on what we're ranking. This is. I'm going in completely blind as to what Anwar and Daniel are going to say.
Yeah, that means we're going to inevitably come to blows at some point. But yeah, looking forward to it.
Look, we want us to try and disagree as much as possible, so we'll see how that plays out. Let's get this show started. We're going to go once again in reverse grid order, going by team. I think that's the easiest way of going about it, and we get a good mix of kind of grades. So let's start at the bottom of the World Drivers' Championship. He only raced a few races in the sport. Jack Doohan. Where do we put him so far? I think it was not exactly the most spectacular stint in Formula One. Daniel, I think we could agree. Where do we put him in terms of on our tier list?
I think he's probably an E-tier driver in my eyes. I'm not sure an F's deserved. I mean, he did get out of Q1 at least 3 times, and he qualified 11th one time, which was his highest grid spot, and it was actually in his last race in Formula One. So take from that what you will, whether he was on the up and up or not. So, you know, it's not an absolute screamer in my eyes, but at the same time, leaving the DRS open when you throw it into turn 1 in your first lap in Suzuka is also pretty unacceptable. So I'd say E. Maybe you'll have stronger opinions, maybe you'll agree. What do you think?
It's got to be in that range, right, Lucy?
Yeah, I got to say he's at the bottom of the table, you know. He got dropped after 6 races, I want to say 6 or 7. I'm sorry, I've lost count of races already. It's been too long since I've watched Formula One and I've gone insane. But he was there for 6, 7 races and he did get dropped. So he's obviously not going to have had an S tier performance. But I also think, you know, everyone understands that sort of around his performances this year, you know, there was a lot of pressure. Alpine is hardly the number 1 team environment to be in. And yeah, I don't think that he had in kind of my years of watching the sport, I've seen people do worse. And I think that, you know, like Daniel said, there were signs that maybe he had a positive trajectory. He made some stupid mistakes, but as I'm sure we'll see later, several drivers have made stupid mistakes. And so, yeah, I say I'd probably put him in D or E tier. I don't know if E tier is an option, so I'll put him in that.
Easy. We can if you think E, let's put E.
I think E. We'll say E.
I mean, I was probably going to lean towards D because although he didn't really show a lot outside of that Suzuka mistake in practice, which was so bizarre, leaving your DRS into the first 2 corners at Suzuka is like a terrible mistake. I don't think he did too much, which you look at and think, oh, that is disgraceful for a guy who's in Formula One. So I don't think he warrants an F. I think I would say it was a little bit hard done by, given the fact that he was only 6 races in the 2025 season. And looking at what his replacement's done, he hasn't exactly set the world alight either. He's also on 0 points. We'll get onto him in a moment. I would personally lean towards D, but I'm kind of outnumbered here. So sounds like
actually, I'd like to come back on that one. I said earlier Bahrain was his last race, which of course it wasn't. It was actually Miami. And I think the nail in the coffin for Doohan was the crash that he had on Miami first lap when he took out, I think it was Lawson, in that special Racing Bulls livery, which was particularly distressing because we didn't get to see that for the rest of the race. So actually, yeah, I think Doohan, he probably is maybe faring a bit better in my head than he actually did. So maybe we'll stick with the I don't know. I
think he's probably safest, right? I don't think he showed enough to be put in. You mentioning that now, I think he's probably the best bet. So
yeah, okay.
I'm going to put him in E. I just think there's worse drivers out there. Would like Mazepin, for example, was like a guaranteed F in my eyes. I don't think he was as bad as Mazepin. Next on the list is, funnily enough, the replacement for Jack Doohan in that second Alpine. He's got the same amount of points as him, and that's Franco Colapinto. Where do we put him? Because I think we had higher expectations of him compared to Doohan, and I feel like he's disappointed us more. Do you agree, Lucy?
Yeah, to be honest, I would probably put Colapinto. This is annoying because I feel Doohan does belong in E tier, and I feel like putting Colapinto in F tier is too harsh. But I'm going to do it. This is not because I think he's had the worst performance of his life. This is because I think, he's not been consistent. He's not crashed out too much. I mean, he crashed out in his first qualifying session at Imola turn 2, I want to say. I think it's turn 2. They have this weird turn 1 that's not actually a turn, but that's not a thing. And so that wasn't a great start. But I'm putting him in F tier because I think he hasn't done enough that sort of suggests that there was kind of a good move, that it was a good move for Alpine to replace Doohan with him. And I think as well, compared to last year and what he could do in the Williams, obviously very different car, probably very different driving styles. Also, the Alpine's just a terrible car. And the Williams, for all it was last year, not quite as terrible. But I'm going to put Colapinto in F tier just because I think compared to what we've seen that he can do, and also what, given the circumstances, he probably should have been doing to warrant it, I don't think he's achieved that. But who knows? Alpine haven't yet had their one rogue podium this year, which they seem to have every year. So maybe he'll get that, and then I'll feel really stupid for putting him in F tier. But for now, that's what I'm doing.
Daniel, you feel that's harsh, being an F?
I do, and I think that's probably the product of expectation from which Franco Colapinto has suffered this year, mostly because of last year. I think it's pretty clear that Williams is quite or at least it was quite a tame car, because we saw from the likes of Nick de Vries as well in 2022 in Monza, managed to jump in that car and perform instantly and score more points than Latifi did. So I think, that probably flattered him a bit. And now he's jumped into this Alpine, which is clearly not as submissive to his kind of inputs, which he's really struggling with, and his confidence a little bit as well. So I think F's a little bit harsh, because I really don't think that Colapinto and Doohan can be really separated in terms of their performance this year so far. Just because you look at their results even on paper and they're really quite similar. You can't even separate them in the driver's standings, but that's just the way of the Alpine this year.
Yeah, I mean, I would personally put E as well. I don't think there's been any improvement or fall from the Doohan level in that second Alpine car. So I think E is probably the fairest. I think putting both of them in E, none of them have been complete disasters, I guess. So yeah, I think E is probably the safest, the fairest kind of place to put it. Let's move on to the next driver, and we're once again going team by team. So we're going to move up to Pierre Gasly, and I think this is hard to call because of how bad the second Alpine seat has been. Do you find this one tough to kind of decide?
Yeah, Gasly has had a very mixed season, to be honest. I'm just going to say it now. I think Gasly's a B-tier driver for this year. In my eyes, I mean, 20 points when your teammate has none. Yes, they've had their difficulties, but that car has kind of been a dog recently. And qualifying fourth in Bahrain, or, finishing high up in Silverstone, I think it was, in Gasly's typical wet weather masterclass quiet, style, has really served him and Alpine well. And also he's helped them become the highest scoring last place constructor in F1 history, which is quite a unique stat. So, I think for that he deserves bumping up a bit, because I think Gasly is and has always been a bit underrated. And I think no more so than this year, where he doesn't have the car, but he is still very at ease in extracting what he can from it. So I think that deserves a B from me.
Lucy, do you think that's fair, being a B-tier driver?
Yeah, B. I'm happy with B. I think that genuinely, if you consider, I realise we're doing this by constructors and not teams. If you consider that Gasly has the same number of points as Lawson and has outscored Tsunoda, he's got like double his points, who were both in a Red Bull, or alternatively were both in an RB for a bit of this season. He's outscored Carlos Sainz in the Williams. He's outscored Bortoletto in the Sauber. He's outscored Behrman in the Haas. Quite a few of whom, I was about to say all of them, we'll get to that. A lot of whom who you would say have kind of had pretty good seasons in an Alpine car that's just awful, like genuinely awful. That, like, he's had a great season. Maybe it is that there's not kind of a teammate to compare him to, but no, there's kind of, even when you account for that, he's had a fantastic season. And to be honest, I'm glad for it. It's kind of cringe, but I just like all of the drivers to do well, and I like them all to show kind of what they're capable of. And it must be annoying when you're in a really bad car. And so I'm kind of glad that he seems to be getting credit for the fact that he's performing well, even if it is mainly because his teammates aren't. So yeah, B tier. I say B. I say that's good. I
had Gasly as a B tier driver as well. I think he's the most B tier coded driver, in the sense of, I think he's like the definition of it. Yeah, I don't think he's exceptional, but he's had a good season considering where his team has been languishing at the back, really tight midfield battle. They haven't really been present him. For him to wrangle 20 points out of that car, fair play to him. So I think there could maybe be an argument for an A. I think it's a very weak argument if there is one. I think B is probably the fairest place to be. So that's all Alpine done. We've got one B-tier driver and two E-tier drivers in that car, kind of reflective of how little ambition Alpine have shown. Let's move on to the next constructor, which is Haas. Oliver Behrman is 19th in the Drivers' Championship with 8 points. Where do we assess him? Because I think he's had a messy season, hasn't he? I don't think it's all been plain sailing. There's probably been hints, maybe, of talent. Do you think, Daniel? Is that probably fair to say?
That's definitely fair to say. Behrman for me is D tier this year because he has so much speed, but on the occasions where he has been the quickest, he has made some catastrophic errors. I mean, Monaco was a kind of a controversial one in how I think it was Sainz that he overtook under a red flag in a practice session. The closing speed was high. And so by the time that Behrman had got past Sainz, he noticed the red flag was out, and it was, it might have been more dangerous to just slam on the brakes. But Silverstone was kind of unforgivable, wasn't he? He picked up 4 penalty points for that incident, crashing in the pit lane, in the pit entry, under a red flag. And he qualified 8th that day in Silverstone. 8th position, and he started 18th in the race consequently. He was one of the few rookies who survived, maybe the only one, if I'm remembering that correctly, and he finished 11th in the race. So there could have been so many points up for grabs at his home race, but he squandered it on Saturday morning, which makes it really painful. Yeah, he hasn't stacked up so well to Ocon, to be honest, in the head-to-head. But yeah, he just needs to iron those moments of madness, really, for me to give him any higher than a D, I think.
I actually kind of disagree. I would probably go a little bit higher. I have got him down as a C tier driver. I think he's got points on a few occasions and he's been close to points. Now, I do also think he had an error-string season, but I think he's showing signs of talent in my eyes. I think, although he's obviously he's already had quite a few errors and stuff, I think that will iron itself over time. But I personally haven't been as disappointed as Daniel was. So I personally would put him as a C. Lucy, where do you stand on this?
I think, I don't know. This isn't. I'm annoyed that you can't agree, because my plan was just basically to go with whichever one of you said C or D, because I'm also deciding between that. Because, you know, it's clear that kind of he's got really good long-term potential, and on the one hand, kind of the errors that he's making, sort of, you almost kind of expect those from rookie drivers, or even if you don't expect them, it's kind of understandable when they happen. But then on the other hand, like, I don't know whether kind of they are reasonable, and I'm just annoyed because I think that kind of he's good and he's got good potential, or whether that's kind of a genuine sort of drawback. I think that I'm inclined to lean more towards D, because even though his teammate is obviously more experienced, there is a bit of a gulf, at least, 19 points, which is not quite as big as the gap between Gasly and his teammates, and definitely doesn't feel like it so much between them on track. I'm going to say D, but I do want to also call out that he's been really consistent this year. I think I mentioned it in the mid-season recap thing. I can't remember what it was called, which is very terrible of me. But he's got like the record for most 11th places in a row. So he has silly errors, and he also has but he also has kind of a lot of consistency in his driving style. So I'm saying D, but do not be surprised if we do this again at the end of the season and he's been upgraded to a C, if he kind of continues on similar trajectories, maybe with a few less crashing into pit walls.
I think it's definitely the errors that are holding him back in terms of getting a little bit higher. I think we're going to put him D because two of us have said D, one said C. I think it's pretty marginal between the two, though. I think it's definitely possible for him to, like Lucy said, jump up. The next on the list is the other side of that garage, which is Esteban Ocon, who, when I see the Drivers' Championship, I'm like, oh my God, how's he up there? And when you look at the results, you notice, okay, he had a very good early start of the season, and recently hasn't really performed as good as previously. But he had a highlight in in China, where he finished 5th. Where do we put his season? Where does his season stack up, Lucy?
I don't know. It is true that kind of the first bit of the season kind of carried his performance-wise, but I think it also did for Haas a bit as well. But I think that he's done a very good job. Obviously, he is more experienced than Behrman, but he is still coming into a new team, which obviously kind of, I think you would always expect there to be some sort of fluctuation in performance when that happens. Maybe I'm just saying this to justify Williams, which we're going to have to get to at some point, but I'm saying it nonetheless. And I have been impressed with him. He remains on my F1 fantasy team for a reason, and that's because he is reliable. He's a reliable driver. It seems that a lot of the times when he's not been scoring points, it tends to be because it's a track that the car doesn't suit. And so obviously the best drivers, Max Verstappen, for this season can get a lot of performance out of the car, even when it's really terrible or at a track that doesn't suit it. But I think that he's been a very consistent driver, which is what Haas want from him. So I'm going to say he's a C driver. But I could very easily be proven wrong.
I do think there is a difference between a B tier and a C tier. Like, I think Gasly, I would say, has had probably a better season, and then Ocon marginally, but I think there is that difference. And I think where we rank him, Ocon, is going to be very dependent on how much recency bias kind of plays a part in it. Danny, where do you stand on it?
I do slightly disagree, actually. I think Ocon deserves the promotion into B tier because...
Interesting.
For the whole time I've watched Formula One, I've thought that Pierre Gasly and Esteban Ocon were so evenly matched. And it was proven in their time as teammates. They were always on the same piece of tarmac together. And I think it's carried on into this year. They've both got inexperienced teammates and they're having to carry the team on their back. I think the Haas car, like you said, it is very inconsistent. Esteban Ocon's got 7 points more than Pierre Gasly. I think that's probably reflective just about of the car's performance over the course of the year. It probably deserves about 7 points more than the Alpine in the hands of Gasly. So from that perspective, I'd put him in B. I think China was probably one of the biggest reasons because it was a real highlight. On the other side, he did luck into a few results like Monaco when everyone else was being his teammate by holding everyone behind him, so Ocon could just have a couple free pit stops. But at the same time, you've got to be there. You've got to do the job in qualifying to get into that position, which isn't easy in Monaco. So I'm campaigning for B, but I'm probably outnumbered, so we might have to go for C.
You've convinced me, actually. I think
same. You've convinced me on that. I'm still going to keep him in C in my personal tier, but I'm very happy for him to be on our averages list, which I believe Anwar's keeping track of. And
yes,
hopefully
I am.
That wasn't my job.
I've got that under control. You've convinced me, Daniel, because I think that point that you mentioned being reflective of the cars is probably fair. And I think I'd still say Gasly's just probably had a little bit better of a season, but I think that Alpine is such a dog of a car that it's kind of influenced my decision that way. So I think that's probably... I think Ocon in B tier is just about fair. So I think we're going to go with that. So good job there. We're moving on from Haas and we'll go to... Do we want to go to Racing Bulls next? They're next in the Constructors. So
yeah, why not?
Let's go through them. So if we're looking at Liam Lawson, he is the lower ranked out of the two Racing Bulls. He obviously had a stint in the Red Bull, which we will talk about as part of this because it's a driver review. Liam Lawson has scored 20 points this season. I think he's really turned it around in the last year. I think we mentioned it in the last couple of pods. He's honestly recovered very well from a massive setback by getting the demotion. How much does that Red Bull stint play into our decision here, though, is the question. Daniel, where do you think is fair for Liam Lawson, given that he's had this mid-season change?
I'm going to be extreme and say D, just because I'm being very resistant to recency bias and probably overcompensating for that resistance. But I think Liam Lawson did have a shocker for at least 2/3 of this season so far. Red Bull, it was an upgrade to put Tsunoda in that car, but because of Lawson's performance, qualifying last in both sprint qualifying and the actual qualifying in China was really a low point for him. And since then at Racing Bulls, he did not have a Hadjar's number at all. Obviously, he's getting a bit more on an even keel with him, especially in terms of points. I'm actually surprised that they're separated by only 2 points. So that kind of caught me by surprise when I noticed that. But I don't think that's really reflective of the balance in pace between those two drivers this season. I think Hadjar's been a bit unlucky recently. Lawson's maybe been a bit lucky, but he has, again, executed quite well the last 2 races in particular. So I'm going to stick with D. What do you think, Lucy?
I'm also going to say D. I think this is because it's midway through the season. Recency does show a positive trajectory, but I think maybe if it was just based on his RB performances, might say C, might. But I think that Red Bull, and admittedly from literally every single person who's ever said anything about Red Bull, that car's a nightmare to drive. But I still think even just from the way that probably, then readjusting to RB, he did have that kind of readjustment period where he was just sort of nowhere near Hadjar after being nowhere near Verstappen. And I think even with the positive trajectory, I'm also going to put him in D. Don't know my letters. This is going to be a problem for this episode. I'm going to put him in D. But again, a little bit like with Behrman, although it would take more, I think, for Lawson in my eyes to get up to a C tier. But if he's on a positive trajectory, then we could see positive movement.
I think you guys are being harsh. Like, I think I recognize the fact that he had a horrible start to the season. It's been a tale of two quarters, I guess, this first half of the season for him, because his first points were in Monaco, where he finished 8th, and then since then he was 11th DNF, 6th DNF, 8th, 8th. I think D's harsh. I personally would put him C, but I recognise I'm outnumbered here, so it's going to have to be D. But I think the first half of the season, first quarter of the season, it looked really rough for him, and I think I think the second quarter has given me a lot more hope, and that's probably why I put him in C, because I think the results really aren't anything to scoff at. Do we think D's probably fair on balance, given the fact you two have said D, or have I been able to convince you?
You haven't convinced me, but I would definitely think by the end of the season, I am expecting Liam Lawson to have ascended to at least C, possibly B.
Yeah, I think there's movement.
Yeah, you haven't convinced me now, but there's room for movement.
Okay, I'll take that. So we'll put Lawson in D. Let's move on to the other side of that garage, which is Isaac Hadjar, who I think some people have said has been the most impressive rookie in terms of his points total. Let me just get that up quickly. He has scored 22 points, which is only 2 more than Liam Lawson, who we've just put in D tier. But I think we would all say he's had a more impressive season. How impressive has it been, though, Lucy?
I personally think that Isaac Hadjar has had an absolute blinder to start this season off. It's weird that he's only 2 points ahead of Lawson. I think that may be a little bit to do with kind of maybe more reliability issues, although that may also be false memories in my brain. I'm thinking he had such a good weekend at Monaco. That was kind of a real standout, because I think that obviously on the one hand, he has been very good in qualifying this season, so you would expect him to be good at Monaco. But still, Monaco as a rookie is hard. I don't think that's a controversial thing to say. And I think I'm not going to put him sort of right the way up in S or A tier, because he has still had those rookie errors. Obviously, we're including the whole season, which does include Australia, even though I think he kind of bounced back very well from that. So I'm going to put him... I think I'm going to rank him about where Pierre Gasly is. I could be convinced to go up if other people want to, but I think he's done for RB quite similarly to what Gasly's done for Alpine, which is mainly provide some stability while everything else is changing.
In a funny way, I think he's had a very reverse season to Lawson, in the sense of, I think Hadjar started off very well and he's been very promising. The last 5 races haven't gone his way, though. But I think the level of performance he came in to the sport with, I think it's an A tier, low A tier. I could maybe be convinced of being B, but I think as a rookie to have had the level of performance and the level of consistency, particularly until Spain, sorry, I think that was really impressive. I think that is probably one. I think A is where I'd put him. I don't know where Daniel's what side of the fence Daniel was on, though.
Oh, I have the deciding vote then, huh?
Yeah, you do. You got all the power.
Yeah, I am actually surprised that you put him in A, Anwar. I thought I was going to have to fight to keep Isaac Hadjar in B, because we'd put Liam Lawson in D. But for me, Isaac Hadjar's a B driver for me this season. Lucy summarised it really well, to be honest. Great qualifyings, especially in Monaco, and then just kind of cruising to great results. He hasn't really had many opportunities to shout over the radio exactly. It's been pretty smooth for him so far. Obviously, Australia was the exception, but I'm not sure we can mark him down on that one. So, B for me.
Yeah, I think I can recognise that B is probably a fair thing. So we'll move on from there. We're outside. Moving away from the Racing Bulls now. We'll go to the next team on our list in terms of the constructors, because that's the order we're doing it, and that's Kick. Now, where are Kick at the moment? So we've got Gabriel Bortoleto and Nico Hulkenberg in those seats. Let's start with Bortoleto. I think he's lower down in the pecking order in terms of the Drivers' Championship, where I think it started off slow for him, and he's picked it up recently. He's on 14 points so far this season in a car that actually only really became competitive midway through this first half, so after a quarter of the races, basically. How do we assess his level of performance, Daniel? Do we think probably in the middle somewhere, in one of those mid-tiers?
Definitely in the mid-tiers. I'm going to go with C, because I think that'll be our first C-tier driver, right? I think C is probably for drivers who have shown promise, but also have shown maybe not the edge that we'd expect from a B tier, like a Pierre Gasly, for example, not the brilliance. Gabriel Bortoleto, perhaps the exception is Hungary, so he's one of those that I'd kind of say by the end of the season, I would be surprised if he hasn't gone up to a B tier because of what's happened recently in Hungary with that 6th place. But on the whole, yeah, just a tale of two halves, like the car, really. He's adapted. He's climbed further up the grid, just like the car's performance has, which I think is pretty, what you'd expect from a rookie like him.
Yeah, I agree. I think City's probably fair. I think the slow start is, and the fact that he's come to form recently. He hasn't been horrible, though. I don't think he's had many massive mistakes or crashes. I remember he crashed in Silverstone, but he hasn't had any glaring mistakes since he made Behrman hard. So I think C's probably fair. Lucy, I imagine you're going to stay in the same area as us.
Same sort of gist. Crashing in Silverstone, I really don't think we can blame him for crashing in Silverstone. But I agree. I think C tier. I think if I'm comparing him to other rookies, I think he's definitely been stronger than Behrman and Lawson, and obviously Doohan and Hadjar. Not Doohan and Hadjar, Doohan and Colapinto. Oh my god, what am I like? But I don't think he's been quite as good as Hadjar. Not quite as consistent so far. Although maybe this will be like his F2 title campaign, where he got off to quite a slow start and then really picked it up in kind of the middle end of the season. Who knows? But I agree. I'd put him in C tier. I think he's had a very good year, very solid year. And I think, as if Sauber continue to grow their car / continue to keep their car not terrible, then he could be on for a very good result. But I think, as a nice segue to the next bit, he's not on the same level that his teammates on right now, and I wouldn't expect him to be, but there is a gap there and there, so I think C is important.
I think Bortoleto is the dependable driver. I don't think you can expect him to make the big mistakes Antonelli has made or Behrman, for example. So I think C is probably fair. I think he will come into his own, I think. I do have confidence in that. Like you said, the segue into the next driver, his teammate, who's had a phenomenal season, I think, for the car and for him, because he's got his first podium. It's Nico Hulkenberg. He's 9th in the Drivers' Championship. And if you told him that he'd be 9th in the Drivers' Championship halfway through the season, I reckon he'd bite your hand off it. Well, I think we're going to go towards one of the higher echelons in terms of the tiers. Where do we place him, though, Daniel? Is it going to be an S, or do we think we're going to settle with A?
I'm going to have to go with A this year, purely because of qualifying. In the head-to-head, Bortoleto is actually winning that battle. So I don't think it's been flawless, and he clearly hasn't been extracting the maximum from the car, which I think S is kind of reserved for drivers who can do that with their machinery, with what they've got. So, I mentioned in the mid-season review he hasn't got through to Q3 yet this year. So that's, for me, where he's kind of letting himself down. But again, he got a podium from 19th on the grid, so he's proving that qualifying doesn't really matter. But I think that still warrants an A grade from me.
Lucy, are you feeling a little bit more ambitious in putting him in S here, or do we think that S is too reserved?
I'm not putting him in S tier. it should be known that I'm kind of making this up as I go along, so I don't really know who I'm going to put in S tier, if anyone. We may get to this and no one's ended up in S tier. But no, I'm putting him in A tier. He's had a fantastic season. That may also be the fact that low expectations. We've talked about expectations so far, but we went into the season expecting that Sauber would once again take until like the 20th round of the season to get any points. And so even from his like 7th place in Australia, we were like, whoa, okay, this is interesting. And then genuinely witnessing Nico Hülkenberg's podium, most transformational moment of my life. And so for that reason and that reason alone, he's got to be an A tier. And he's just done a great job. He's been a great team leader, rookie teammate. He's just had a very strong performance. Don't really think that Sauber could have asked for more. And I don't know. Haas are probably a bit sad that he's gone.
Yeah, I think A is probably fair. I think S is reserved for only a certain set of drivers, and we'll get to that later. But I think A is probably fair. Let's move on to the next team now. We're going into Williams. Now, Lucy, this is your field of expertise, isn't it? So we're going to start with Carlos Sainz, and I think we all had high expectations going into this for him, and I don't think he's really delivered on it. Where do we put his season so far? Because he has struggled in that car.
Yeah, I mean, the way that I segued into that made it sound like he sort of DNF'd every race and has never made it out of Q3. He has not had the worst season that he could have had. However, I would be expecting him to do better. I think he had such strong performances in that Ferrari, and I really think that Williams, at least at the start of this season, had a very good car. It has, I think, dropped off, and more specifically their engine parts seem to have dropped off the car in the last few races. But I would expect him to be higher up the constructors. As previously mentioned, he is behind Pierre Gasly in an Alpine and behind Liam Lawson. This is rough. And he's got kind of like a quarter. That may be slightly wrong. We'll go with a quarter. He's got like a quarter of the points that his teammate does.
It's just under a quarter. It's just over a quarter.
It's just over a quarter, which for a driver as experienced as him is not where I want him to be. I'm going to put him in D tier. I could be persuaded to go lower. Probably couldn't be persuaded to go higher.
I would put him in D as well, just on the basis of he had this expectation. He's got a reputation of being a very adaptable driver, and he hasn't really adapted well in a car that has clearly got pace, because Alex Albon has got 54 points in his races so far this season, and his teammate's on 16, which really isn't a good look for him. I think D is probably fair. I don't think he's had a horror show, but it's certainly not been to the level that we've come to expect out of a driver like Carlos Sainz. Daniel, are you in agreement, or?
Yeah, not much to add really. Just that Carlos Sainz has scored 29.62962962962% of Alex Albon's points this year, which is not really enough. I think he said at the start of the year, didn't he, Carlos Sainz, give me 6 races to get up to speed with this car and you'll see what I can do. Or words to that effect. I might be paraphrasing. But it has taken a bit more than 6 races. I still don't think he's really on top of all the issues they've had. The pace has dropped off because of the cooling issues that they've had to sacrifice pace for, which is not ideal for Williams. But Alex Albon is kind of dealing with it in a way that Carlos Sainz is not. So work to do for sure for Carlos Sainz D tier.
Yeah, I don't think there's much we can argue here. Alex Albon, on the other hand, has had a pretty impressive season. 54 points in a Williams is something that I think Williams will be ecstatic about as they try and move their way back to the front of the field. Where do we think the Alex Albon, where do you think you should sit on this tier list? Because I think it could be A or B in my eyes.
For me, A stands for Alex Albon, and it's also where he belongs in this tier list, just purely because everyone's seen what he's able to do this year. Australia was a standout, to be honest. Finishing in 5th position in that race was probably his highlight of the year so far. I mean, he did finish 5th again in Imola and Miami, but in terms of expectation, there wasn't that expectation with Williams coming into the year, and then in preseason testing, everyone was like, "Oh, hang on, they might have some decent pace," and maybe Carlos Sainz will be up there mixing it with the Ferraris, which he has at some point. That's partly due to Ferrari's downfall, but Albon has been the one to extract what he needs to from that car, and credit where it's due. 54 points well earned, where I'm looking at, and with 3 DNFs in a row, which weren't his fault. So ultimately, a great season, A tier.
Lucy, are you in agreement?
Absolutely. Listen, I'm still devastated that Alex Albon did not get podium at Imola, because I personally believe that he could have done that, but not for Ferrari and Charles Leclerc driving into him. But that's not the point of this. The point of this is that he's had a fantastic season. Great, beautiful, fantastic. My favourite team, possibly my favourite driver, purely because Carlos is currently underperforming, and maybe then they'll become equal. But no, he's having a great year. A stands for Alex Albon, and he loves being in A tier so much that he's put it in his name twice. That is all I have to say.
That's good. I like that. Let's move on to Aston Martin next. And it's Aston Martin who kind of have got two drivers who've scored exactly the same amount of points. Lance Stroll will start off with, because he is just below in 12th position in the championship with 26 points. Where do we think Lance Stroll, who has obviously come across lots of criticism, I don't think he's had that bad of a season, though. Do you agree, Daniel?
I do agree. Yeah, pleasantly surprising from Lance Stroll this year, I'd say, which probably earns him about a C tier, in kind of line with Bortoletto, who's shone at moments, but also had some dismal ones. I think Canada was a bit of a shocker for Lance Stroll, who finished about 10 places behind his teammate, I think, and you contrast that with the likes of Australia in the wet, getting that 6th position. It's just kind of, it makes it very difficult to judge him. But I think on that basis, he's kind of sniffing around the middle area. But yeah, it's a Lance Stroll kind of season is what I'd say.
Yeah, I think C seems pretty perfect for Lance Stroll. Lucy, are you in agreement, or are you going to try and convince us somewhere?
Yeah, I basically feel the same. He's had he's been there. Sometimes, I mean, it's always with Stroll. It's usually in the wet races. He has some really good performances and then some really terrible ones. He has not driven into any barriers or got stuck in any gravel on formation laps so far this year, which is an improvement.
That's an improvement, isn't it?
An improvement on last year. We got to look for the positives. Yeah, I think that considering who his teammate is, even though they've scored the same amount of points, you always have more confidence in Alonso than in Stroll. At least that's what I think. Like, say, for example, Alonso was on for some pretty good points in Monaco, and then his engine died. Seemingly, it didn't want him to get points. Whereas I can't think of times when Stroll's had the same thing. Like, engine performances might have limited his pace or his qualifying ability or something, but there hasn't been something where you could have said, "Oh, if his engine hadn't blown up, he would have got a guaranteed 8 points there." I think it was 8 for Alonso. I could be wrong there. So yeah, I agree with what Daniel said. Yeah.
Yeah, and I don't. Do we think there's any movement in terms of Alonso now? Because on the same amount of points, he was very unlucky at the start of the season. You mentioned that he had that retirement in Monaco. Is there any reason for us to move Alonso out of C to separate him from his teammate, do you think?
I have critical information that may change your mind on this subject, Anwar, which is that in the qualifying head-to-head, Alonso is leading 14-0 to Lance Stroll, which is not flattering at all for Lance Stroll and is probably warranting, in my opinion, of Fernando Alonso ascending to B tier this year. Unlucky for a while, and then kind of cashed in some great results. In the race head-to-head, by the way, he's leading 9-5. So that's comprehensive enough to warrant a new tier above Stroll, even though they are on equal points. We know that can be misleading in Formula One. So that's just my 2 cents.
Yeah, I love the fact that you said, do we need persuading to put Alonso in a different tier? And we both immediately went, yeah, we were obviously planning to put him in a different tier. I too would put Alonso in B. I think I kind of mentioned it in Stroll's section, but his points losses have tended to come because of engine problems and bad luck. Although sometimes he just hasn't been on the pace. And, you know, when he scored points, they've been like really good points. And you can't, he's just a very good defensive driver as well. He has good qualifying performances, and then he also backs it up because seemingly his car's like 3 hours slower than everyone else's, and yet nobody can overtake him. And anyone who can do that's got to be at least in B tier.
I mean, I wouldn't actually believe that Alonso should be in B tier. I was just trying to I was hoping and praying that we wouldn't agree on another one. But Alonso was in B tier. Let's move on to the big four.
Anwar really wants conflict, and we're just refusing to give him any conflict.
I'm trying to pour kerosene on the fire, and you guys aren't biting at them. It's annoying.
You're trying to pour kerosene on the fire, but nobody's got any matches.
Let's move on to the big four teams now. The teams that we'd always kind of expect to be at the top end of the constructors. And funnily enough, we've got Red Bull in fourth, which is a very unusual place for me to be talking about them. This is like tale of two car seats. So we'll start with the first one who's lower, Yuki Tsunoda. We don't have anyone in F tier at the moment. Is he the first entrance, Daniel?
I really didn't want to go first on this one because it's really harsh to say that Yuki Tsunoda belongs in F tier. I actually don't think he does. I think F tier is reserved for a special kind of driver. Like you said, like a Mazepin is a guaranteed F tier. I think Yuki Tsunoda, we know that he is a good driver, right? And he proved that in Racing Bulls in the first two races when, you know, maybe he didn't get all the points in the world because the strategy didn't go his way. But at the same time, he has scored 180 points less than Max Verstappen this season, which is dire. I believe Max Verstappen has annihilated him in the qualifying head-to-head, and it's 11-1 in the race head-to-head as well. So I would advocate for an E, purely because there are slight external circumstances like this being the Red Bull seat that we can maybe go a little bit easier on him. But I don't know. I could easily be moved down to an F if someone is more willing than me or is less of a fence-sitter than I am.
Lucy, where do you stand? Because I think this is a very, very tough one to decide.
I, too, agree with Daniel. I know you don't want me to say this, Anwar. I know that you're internally dying inside that I've just said the word I agree again. But he has not done badly enough to warrant kind of an F tier. You know, he had a very good start to the season in RB. Obviously, we're not really counting that, but it did happen. And so we do have to acknowledge it. The two races that he spent there went quite well for him and was arguably a bit screwed over by RB's terrible strategy. At Red Bull, I think we have to give him some grace. He's not had a great time. I think, you know, but I think, again, a little bit kind of how positions can lie. He does seem to have been closing the gap to Verstappen. Not enough to bring him out of E tier yet, although maybe if that continues to be a thing, it might be. If you look at kind of how close the field is, like he's only sort of now 1 or 2 tenths behind Verstappen, which is sort of what Red Bull would want him to be doing. But the problem is that like Alpine is like 1 or 2 tenths behind Red Bull in terms of car performance. So he's not making it out of Q1, even though he's not having a bad performance, just because of the fact that everyone's really packed in close together. So I'm saying he's in E tier because I think, firstly, it kind of takes a special breed of awful to be an F tier driver. And secondly, I actually think that some of the stats aren't flattering him, and that you can't just directly compare him to how Perez was doing compared to Verstappen, or even how, you know, in the olden days, Gasly or Albon or Ricciardo were doing, because of the fact that the cars are all close together in terms of performance, and also the Red Bull car itself is just awful.
Oh, man, I kind of want to lean towards F, because my what I'm wondering is how much worse could it be I don't know how much worse it could be. Like, you scored 2 points, and that was at Bahrain all the way back in April. We're now towards the end of August. Look, if you guys are happy with E, we'll go with E, but I think there is like a very strong case for F here, because
I will accept your opinions on F tier, but I would like to say that I do not endorse those opinions. You are wrong.
You have not convinced me of F just by begging for it, but maybe for the sake of balance, maybe it's a relative F compared to everyone else on the grid. Maybe not.
I think that's what it has to be, though, isn't it?
2021, for example. Yeah.
I think he has. I think it would be wrong to say he has been a worse driver than him this season. Right. Compared to
the pace of the car, the potential of the car, and the teammate, I agree.
Yeah. I think unfortunately he's gonna die by the sword of being compared to Verstappen. I think I'm gonna put him in E, but yeah, it's such a tough call. We'll go to Verstappen. I think this should be the first entrance into S, because I don't really see many. I personally think he's an S tier driver. I think he hasn't put really any feet wrong throughout the course of the season in a car that really hasn't performed to the level and given him the resources that he needs to kind of challenge. And on the rare occasion he has done so. Daniel, is there any debate here for Verstappen?
If you wanted to be contrarian, you could say, well, actually, S tier is, reserved for someone who has absolutely maximized. And I don't think Verstappen has, on occasion, Spain being probably the best example of where he threw away many points for no reason, picked up many penalty points, and was only one away from a ban for a long time. So from that perspective, if we're doing this based on driver ethics and their conduct on track, I think Max Verstappen might be D. But in this scenario, yes, he is one of the greatest of all time, and hence, in this season, he is showing that, and hence, I think it would be wrong to put him anywhere other than S when he's got victories like Japan and Imola on the table.
Lucy, do you agree? Verstappen S?
Yeah, I mean, maybe compared to like last year Verstappen or 23 Verstappen, no, but this isn't comparing like drivers to previous iterations of themselves. Like, his car is awful, and yet he somehow still got wins. And this isn't just kind of beginning of the year when Red Bull was slightly less awful. This is like sprint race Belgium. And I think, that is something which he may not really be in the Drivers' Championship anymore, like we were maybe even thinking he might be at the start of the year. But, he can take it to the McLarens, who have a much better car, and that kind of does show that he's committed to Red Bull, which clearly shows, commitment. I don't know. I'm trying to make a metaphor, but I can't. But yeah, I agree. He's an F tier driver, and this isn't necessarily about sort of not an F tier driver, an S tier driver. I'm not very good at pronunciation.
I'm glad that you clarified that, because I was about to go in.
I'm not very good at pronunciation, and it is really coming back to bite me this episode. And I should promise I'm not always like this. If this is anyone's first episode, I'm usually better than this, slightly. But he is an S tier driver, and this is not about pointing to one particular performance and saying he did fantastically at that performance. This is just kind of he's very consistently up there when compared to his teammates and compared to like the laws of physics, he probably shouldn't be.
Yeah, I think it says a lot that he's got these wins that we haven't been able to predict. Like, Japan came as a surprise, Imola came largely as a surprise. I think he's able to pull out results that we can't really predict on this show, which is why I think S is probably fair. Let's move on to the Mercedes drivers now. We'll start with Kimi Antonelli, who started off really promisingly. I think he's dropped off in the European leg of the season, though. Where do you think is fair, do you think, Lucy?
I don't know really where to say, because, yeah, it's been interesting. He did start off well, and since then he's really dropped off. But, you know, the Merc's been a troublesome car, would be the nice way to say it. It's not been very consistent. Particularly, I don't know if it's a tyre issue or if it's like a battery thing or what it is, but it doesn't do very well in hot climates, which when you're going around track quite fast, quite a lot of hot climates. Antonelli has had quite a few mechanical DNFs this year, which are hurting his points. But he has also had some rookie errors. I think particularly in the last few races, he seems to be having confidence problems. And obviously he's had some shining moments, thinking sprint quali, Miami and Canada in the race. First podium and first pole in your rookie season is always going to be impressive, especially when there's a very dominant team at the top and it's not you. But I think I'm going to say C tier. And this is not, because C tier is kind of my average for sort of you're performing as I expected you to. And I think that is sort of what I've got from Antonelli. Really kind of bar Miami, there hasn't been any points where I thought, oh my gosh, like that was such a surprise that you got such a good result there. But equally, there haven't been many moments where I've thought, this is a real shock that you've done this badly. Most of this can be attributed to rookiness. And his teammate is kind of a very inbuilt driver to Mercedes now, despite them thinking about firing him. So I'm going to say Antonelli is in C tier, but averages could be kind of swayed. I'm not going to sort of like start crying if you say that he's a different average.
Daniel, where do you stand here? Because I'm in agreement. I think C is probably fair.
Yeah, I agree with you, Lucy. Glad you've sobered up after that Max Verstappen F tier statement. You need to stop podcasting under the influence.
Necessary sobering up there.
Yeah,
for legal reasons, I'm not drunk.
Oh, good.
For legal reasons, I am. For some reason, my brain is just refusing to connect to like my vocal cords.
The fact you need to clarify you're not drunk. Yeah. Anyway, Kimi Antonelli, what's going on? He C tier. I agree. Yeah. George Russell has 6 podiums this year. Kimi Antonelli has 1, which was an impressive one in Canada, but 4th and 5th were not far behind at the time when Norris crashed. So it wasn't, a far and away podium. The sprint pole in Miami was also a highlight. But then we have the dreaded European season of damage, engine failures, lack of confidence, burnout, I think, is a big problem for Antonelli as well. So for that reason, I think a C, middle of the road, kind of the performances that he's put in kind of balance out to be there, I think.
The burnout thing is interesting because I think it's something as well that, like, you don't really think about it, but sort of, admittedly less so in the European season, but the jump from the number of races between F2 and F1, especially now F1 has 24 races, like that's a massive jump. And especially considering that Antonelli came up through the junior ranks very quickly, like that, he's suddenly kind of, there's a lot more double and triple headers than you would usually get in F2. F2 has like a month-long break between Australia and Bahrain, I want to say. I might have got that wrong, but they have a really long break at some point in the season, like early in the season, that F1 doesn't have. And so really summer break is like the first long time that kind of, if he's on a slightly negative trajectory, any sort of loss of confidence, there's not really any time to build back that momentum like there is in F2 when you might be able to rely on there being a 3-week break after every race.
Yeah, I think that's a good point because it's not really talked about a lot. George Russell, on the other side of the Merc garage, has performed exceptionally in my eyes. It's probably only going to be an S or an A tier for George Russell. Where is it? What side of the fence are you on, Daniel?
I'm on the S side of the fence, personally.
I think
it. Yeah, I don't really think you can argue anything else from George Russell because we don't know if anyone could extract more from the Mercedes. Maybe they could, maybe they couldn't. Lewis Hamilton couldn't extract more than George Russell when he was at Mercedes, and they were teammates, at least in 22 and 24 anyway, not 23. That was a bit of an off-season for Russell, but he has been extracting what we have to say is the maximum. Like I said, 6 podiums is exceptional. He does now have one more than Max Verstappen, who we've put in S tier. And I think, I don't think there's much more to say on Russell, to be honest, just that he is putting up well with his rookie superstar teammate, Kimi Antonelli, and kind of putting him in his place a bit, I think.
I think it's a case where, like, Antonelli has been shown levels, unfortunately, by George Russell, who's shown unbelievable levels of consistency. Do we really remember any mistakes that he's made, Lucy? Because nothing's really coming to mind from me.
I can't think off the top of my head, but there is the entire possibility that he has made a mistake and it just happened at the same time that there was lots of other chaos going on in a race, and therefore I've just forgotten him. Silverstone wasn't great for him, considering it was a wet race, which he usually is quite good at, and also cooler temperatures than Merck would have expected to perform a bit better. But again, he didn't really make an error. That was just more him not having pace that we might have expected him to have. Although I'm beginning to think that a little like every Australian who's ever lived, he is also cursed at his home race. But that's not the point of this. I think, given that he is very much not the favourite child at Mercedes anymore, there's a reason that when there were talks about him being replaced by Verstappen, that we were all like, obviously, Verstappen going to Mercedes would have been fascinating, but I definitely got the sense there was a collective response, which was, but he's been having, I would say, the best season of his life, George Russell, even though he maybe hasn't won as much stuff as last year, or crossed the finish line first as much as last year yet. He's had the season of his life, and I genuinely would have been surprised had Mercedes fired him because he's been having such good performances. So I put him in S tier, because a bit like Verstappen is in S tier because he's outdriving the Red Bull so much, not necessarily because he's winning the World Drivers' Championship or lapping everyone in every race. I would put Russell in there for the same place because he's somehow managing to make the Mercedes look consistent, which I don't think you can do that. Like that Mercedes is not consistent. I'm not sure how he's doing that.
Yeah, I think the fact that we can, I think we mentioned a really good point there about Russell and the replacement with Verstappen rumours earlier. The fact that we all kind of felt aggrieved by it shows how good he's been. And I think it's probably fair to put him in S tier because he's just simply inevitable, isn't he? He's always on the podium, having performances that we don't really expect or go under the radar. He's just always there.
Yeah, isn't that the meme of this year is like do nothing P3 because he's just so consistent. It's like if any chaos goes on, George Russell will probably be there and probably get a podium, which was kind of happened last year a bit as well.
But he's doing it at a better level because I don't think that car is as good as what they had last year. Because Anthony has been struggling a little bit more. So I think S is probably fair. We've got 2 drivers in S at the moment, Verstappen and Russell. Let's see if anyone is going to join them. Next on the list is probably a hard discussion to have, though. Lewis Hamilton, arguably the greatest of all time, 7-time world champion. But this season hasn't been his best. He did get that sprint win in Shanghai, so keep that in mind. But where do we put his season? Because it hasn't been his best, has it, Daniel?
Far from it. Lewis Hamilton for me is going into D tier for this year. I think, it's hard to say, but for me, one of the criteria for being the greatest of all time is longevity. And I think that's why Fernando Alonso is probably up there, at least in the top 10, because although he didn't have the raw pace of a young Lewis Hamilton when they entered in 2007, or they were even when Hamilton was a rookie and Alonso had just joined, he's 44 years old and he's still able to do this and adapt to new regulations and cars every single year. But Lewis Hamilton has not adapted to this one this year. And, it's kind of a fall off, if I may be so bold, in results. 3 fourth places this year, 4th place finishes. Charles Leclerc has multiple podiums. Sprint win in China, yeah, whatever. It doesn't matter anymore at this point. That was so long ago. The circumstances were clearly in his favour in that one, and it was ultimately a sprint race. like all the drivers say it doesn't count for much anyway. So I don't think we can keep living on that anymore. I think it's putting that aside. I think it's a D-tier performance.
Lucy, where do you stand? Is it as bad as a D for you?
I think I have to put it in a D. I mean, he himself has been very critical of his own performance, and I think some of it has to be attributed to Ferrari. But I think he would have wanted more. The team would have wanted more, and compared to his teammate, I think we all wanted more for him. And again, this could change in the second half of the year if he has a really good second half, or alternatively, if Leclerc has a really bad second half, we might, the gulf might close and then we might rethink things. But no, I think I too will put him in D tier. I could maybe be persuaded up to a C, but kind of like that would go against my rationale, which is C is for performing as expected. And I think that he has underperformed compared to what I was expecting from him. And so I don't think I can justify putting him in C.
We are not saying, by the way, as another clarification, that he is washed. It's just he hasn't shown what we expect from a 7-time world champion this season, unfortunately.
I was going to say the number of clarifications that you and mitigations that you put before we got to this section has led me to believe that you're going to rank him quite lowly.
I also think D. I don't think it's. I think I could understand. Like, I think you maybe kind of a contrarian argument to make it an E, but he has won a sprint race, and that's more than what Ferrari really could have hoped. To be honest, I don't think they've been that good at all. But I think he's been utterly outclassed. Leclerc's wiped the floor with him, unfortunately. In kind of races and in qualifying too. So I think D is probably fair. If we're looking at Leclerc, do we kind of think that isn't, how high do we think Leclerc is? The issue is we don't really know where this Ferrari lies, to be honest, isn't it, Daniel? It's tough to judge.
I learned a new word the other day, and I might use it in this context. It's mugwump. So it means someone who kind of sits on the fence and doesn't really contribute a whole lot. And I might use my mugwump pass for Charles Leclerc between S and A, because I don't feel like it's an S performance. I don't know. You just get that feeling of someone who's really, really impressed this year. And I don't think it's been quite Charles Leclerc. Obviously, he has.
S is very generous, is my initial reaction.
Yeah, I know. But at the same time, I can't think of anything that Charles Leclerc's really done wrong. Sure, he hasn't stood up to Ferrari like we kind of wanted him to, and that kind of communication difficulties that they keep having at Ferrari, and maybe that's some justification in kind of the mentality that he approaches the races with regarding his strategy and the engineering teams, and also Hungary as well. That was pretty disappointing. But I am leaning more towards A, I think, purely because of that. It doesn't feel, I know the Ferrari car's not there, but I can't justify S yet. There hasn't been a performance that I can point at and go, that was S right there. That's enough.
I think that what you mentioned there about performance is exactly the reason why I was very surprised that you said S, because with George Russell, I think you can pick out performance and think, oh my God, we're fair play to him. I didn't expect that. I don't think any result that Leclerc has come and given out leaps off the pages. Oh my God, what a result, what a race. He got his highest finish this season was second in Monaco, and that was a good qualifying lap. I think Leclerc has shown stuff in qualifying. I think Belgium was another example where, oh no, not Belgium, sorry, Hungary was another example where it was a surprise pole, but that was, I don't think the fact that he fell off was his fault, but it hasn't been a result which really leaps off the page and thinks it gets me excited about him. So I think A is fair. I think it's harsh, but unfortunately, I don't think he's been at the level of George Russell or Verstappen. Lucy, where do you sit on this?
Yeah, no, I mean, Leclerc's had an all right season. He's done quite well. I will give you A tier for him. I personally don't think that he has excelled. In some ways, maybe surviving Ferrari for half a season is in its own way a form of excelling. But for me, yeah, I don't want to put him in S tier. He's A tier for me, maybe even a bit lower if I'm feeling harsh, but A tier. Yeah, it's just, he's had good moments, and obviously, you know, Hungary, he was doing very well. He got pole position, which no one really saw coming, and also then seemed to keep it until some mysterious Ferrari-ism happened. But yeah, A tier for me. Yeah, I just, to be honest, I'd even put him in B tier given the others that I've put in A tier. But since we've said A so far, I won't be too controversial and I'll stick with A.
I think B is harsh, but I can just about see the vision with it. But I think A is probably fair. Would we say that Leclerc had a better season than the likes of Ocon, Gasly, Alonso, Hadjar? I would probably even say yes. So I think A is probably fair. I don't know if you agree with what I've just said, though, Lucy.
Yeah, I mean, I put Ocon in C tier, so kind of that slightly changes. But yeah, I can see the vision for him in A tier. I just could have also seen the vision for him in B tier. I just want it noted. I want it noted for all the people listening that he is an in-between for me.
There's a lot of drivers that are in between. But yeah, I think these last two, the two McLarens, this will be interesting to see, because I think we'll get some debate here. We'll start with the person who's the hunter in the championship battle, Lando Norris. Where do we assess a season that he hasn't really been at his best, but he's still in the fight? Daniel, what level do you think he's performed at?
I'd be surprised if we do disagree here, actually, from what you've just said, because I think I think Norris is a safe A-tier driver for this year, because his pace has been rapid quite a lot, quite often, but it's just extracting that pace has become, well, it was a bit of an issue earlier in the season. In the past 4 races, he's really stepped up. 3 wins and 1 second place is impressive since Canada as well, to bounce back from that disappointment, which you have to really severely put some minus points against his name for, that incident in Canada. Yeah, it was that kind of season where we know he can do more. It was really frustrating to see. I think he might be coming out the other side now of those troubles that he's been having. Maybe that is just based on results, and they might reoccur later in the season. It will be fascinating to see how his kind of relationship in pace to Piastri kind of evolves over time this season for the rest of the year. But yeah, I mean, the likes of Australia and his pole lap in Monaco were especially stunning. So I really don't think that warrants any less than an A, but you can't give him S because of Canada, Jeddah qualifying, Bahrain. He made a meal of it when they were quite dominant. So it's A for me.
Lucy, your turn. Where do you put Norris?
Yeah, A. I would say A as well. I'm so sorry, Anwar. You so wanted there to be conflict, and
yeah, I really did. I thought this is the one.
We've spent too much time presenting a podcast together. You should know, if my terrible predictions aren't involved in an episode, there is not going to be any conflict.
It's so unfortunate, isn't it?
Very solid A-tier driver. He's had a good season, but he has also had a very good car, and he's had some slightly lower moments, like Bahrain, and he has had some very good, strong moments like Australia, which I think everyone would say was a pretty dominant performance. Races like Monaco, where he's very impressive to win Monaco because it means he's very good at qualifying. I realise everyone knows that, but I don't know why I'm saying it. But he's had a very good year, but I wouldn't say that he's kind of, gone above and beyond in terms of outperforming the car. But I would say that he's he's not underperformed really. He's just done very well, and so A tier. This is kind of why I wanted to put Leclerc a little further down, because I do feel like Norris has been better than Leclerc. So if in my imaginary system where we can have like A stars and like A minuses, or alternatively like B plus, imagine Norris is like a very solid A/A star, whereas Leclerc is more A minus/B plus.
I think it's an interesting one. You mentioned the comparison between Norris and Leclerc. I think Norris has had higher peaks for sure. I think he's obviously had a good car, but I think there have been performances where you look at and think he's done a really good job. But he's also had performances where he's made a meal out of it, and I don't think Leclerc's had the same extent of those. He hasn't had an incident like Canada, for example. I think A is fair. I was hoping that one of you would say we're going to say B. And I think there's a little bit more of a spotlight on him because he's in the World Championship battle. So I think that makes it so everything is a little bit more dramatic in terms of how good he is and how bad he is. I think those type of swings are a little bit more heavy. But I think A's
we'll disagree for the next one, though, right? Surely.
I think there will be. Oscar Piastri, does he warrant an S tier considering he's leading the World Championship in only his third season in the sport?
Yeah, why not? S tier, just about, slipping in there. No, it's been exceptional from Oscar Piastri, really, hasn't it? Just class, really, is the word that I'd use to describe his season. Classy. He's been off the podium only twice, which is the same as Lando Norris, to be honest. But he has been first more consistently than Lando Norris, only by one win. I think he's leading him by. But he's just been so consistent. That's Oscar Piastri's signature, is calm, cool, and consistent, all the C's. And we're seeing that now. I mean, he's kind of shunned the law of diminishing returns like McLaren themselves have, kind of coming into this year. We expected him to take a step up, obviously, because it's his third season, and that's what normally happens. But I'm not sure anyone expected this much of a step up. And I think it's the same for McLaren. Nobody expected them to have quite this advantage over everyone that they have had. And yeah, from that sense, Oscar Piastri just is the McLaren of the drivers from this year. And to be honest, I think he's a little unlucky to only be 9 points ahead of Norris, given what he's been doing in that car. It certainly feels like he's had the upper hand, but who knows, the gap could easily grow, or, like I said, maybe Norris is getting a handle on those issues and it could shrink for the rest of the year. And that's what makes it so unpredictable. And, God, the Dutch Grand Prix seems like a world away. I just want it to come. Oh, my God. Okay, S tier easily.
Interesting. Easily is a very commanding term. Lucy, are you in agreement with S tier?
Yeah, I can go with S tier. I think he's had a very good season, very strong season, very consistent. And yeah, I think that kind of bar the Silverstone thing, which I think maybe when we discussed it, we said we maybe thought 10 seconds was a bit harsh. I can't remember. But bar that, he's just had like a very consistent season. He's not really made any mistakes. Also bar Australia, but as previously established, he is, like all Australians, cursed. And yeah, I'd say very solidly S tier. It could have been argued down to an A if you really wanted to, but I think he has been the stronger of the two McLaren drivers so far this year. And I think considering the general fact that it's his third year in the sport and he's fighting for a championship, also the Alpine are like last, but that's not really to do with his performances. That's just funny. Yes, S tier. That is, I concur with Daniel.
There's definitely been a step between the two McLaren drivers. There's definitely a step between Norris and Piastri in terms of the performance this season. I think Daniel's it's interesting that you said that he's been unlucky to be only that much further ahead of Norris in the championship. I think that's also a good point. It has felt that he's had more momentum throughout. So I think that probably is a good thing for Norris. He's not run away with it, which is good. But I think it is probably an S tier for Piastri. So just to look through our tier list, we've got in our S tier, we've got Verstappen, Russell, and Piastri. In our A tier, we've got Hülkenberg, Albon, Leclerc, Norris. B tier, we've got Gasly, Ocon, Hadjar, Alonso. C tier, Bortoletto, Stroll, and Kimi Antonelli. In D tier, we've got Lewis Hamilton, Behrman, Carlos Sainz, and Leo Lawson. And in E tier, we have got 3 drivers. We've got Doohan, Colapinto, and Yuki Tsunoda. No one being in F. Probably says a lot about the quality of drive we have nowadays in Formula One. But that brings us to the end of a mammoth driver tier list episode on the Warwick F1 show. I want to thank Daniel and Lucy for hosting this with me. I want to thank you guys for watching from your seats at home, and we'll be back soon with another episode to fill the time in this summer shutdown. I've been your host, Anwar, and we'll see you in the next one. Goodbye.